Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you guys know about an opportunity to learn some of the most important skills in life, if not the most important skills. And those are the skills of learning and doing so rapidly, effectively, and easily. You see, guys, I'm putting on a completely free 60-minute webinar that you guys can check out, where I will be going into my absolute best memory tips, learning tips, and speed reading tips so that you can immediately begin applying them and accelerating your learning of anything and everything. All you need to do to claim your spot in this free webinar is visit jle.vi/webinar. We have showings at many different times throughout the days for every time zone, but you have to log in and claim your spot. So that's jle.vi/webinar. And I really look forward to seeing what you guys achieve. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode. I want to take a moment to shout out to my super friend in India, Churchill Gugalia, who gave us a wonderful 5-star review titled Inspiring, Educating, and Enlightening. I learned about the podcast from the Udemy course of Jonathan, and now I am a regular listener. I'm a super fan of Jonathan's work and only have praise for this podcast. I wanted to specially thank Jonathan for episode 184. Listening to it helped me with a very close friend struggling with relations. This is a podcast for everyone because before learning anything, you must first learn to learn effectively. I agree, and thank you very, very much, Churchill, for that wonderful review. And if you haven't left a review, please do, because it would be just absolutely wonderful, and our team really appreciates it. On to today's episode. You guys, today we are rejoined by Nelson Dellis. And this is a big deal, not just because Nelson is the 4-time USA memory champion, but because he was the 5th ever episode guest on this show. I think I've gotten a lot better at interviewing. He has gotten a lot better at many things, including writing. He came back to talk to us about the 2 books that he has published since and numerous climbs up some of the world's largest mountains. He also runs a thriving charity called Climb for Memory and travels all around the world teaching these incredible memory techniques. We have a very far and wide-ranging conversation where we talk about everything from dealing with failure to the difference between being a subject matter expert and teaching, all the way to, of course, as you can expect, some memory hacks that you can implement. It's a great episode. I always enjoy talking to Nelson, and that is why he has become a super friend in the years since he originally came on the show. So I just know you are going to enjoy. So here is my super friend, Nelson Dellis. Nelson, my friend, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you, man. I am good. It's been a while, but I'm great. How are you?
Really good. You know, this feels like a total homecoming for me because many people may not realize, but you were our 5th ever episode. And I think one of the first ones on the show. And I remember recording it and being like, oh my God, don't blow this. This guy's such a big deal. We're now in almost episode 200. So it's great to have you back on the show and hear all about all the stuff that's been going on in your life.
Yeah, man. Wow. First, congrats. I mean,
thank you, sir.
200 episodes is no joke. That's amazing.
It's a lot of hours standing here on this microphone, that's for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Tell us what's been going on with you and what's new. I mean, I know because you and I have become good buddies, but share with the audience all the different stuff you've been working on in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah. Well, kind of the most recent thing is my book came out today. So finally, this project I've been working on.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Since like 2010, I've been trying to write like an adult book on how to do the memory things that I do. Mm-hmm. And it's been a long road, but it finally came out on the 25th of September. that's a big one. I had a kid. I just had a baby boy a month ago.
Congratulations again.
Crazy thing. Has nothing to do with memory, but maybe it eventually will, because it'll test my memory.
Totally.
Yeah. And then I've competed a bunch in different memory competitions.
Yeah. What are you at now? I mean, when we spoke, you were the 3-time USA memory champion, and I've had to update all our marketing materials, all of our everything. You know, you just keep winning, and it makes my team have to update all the graphics.
I'm so sorry.
What's the record now? What are your records?
Yeah, so I won again. That's right, in 2015. I couldn't go compete in 16 because I was on Everest. Again, I made an attempt. And then 17, there was no championship. And then 18 was just this year. I did not win. I got to the finals and I don't know what happened. We could talk about that later on. Yeah, still competing. In terms of records, I think in 2015, I broke the record for memorizing names, the most names in 15 minutes, which was 201 names.
Wow.
And then just this past memory championship, I did 217, which was a new record, which sounds amazing. And I got the record only to be told immediately after that some young girl from one of the high schools that was competing did 234. So
no.
I broke it, but then instantly lost it at the same time, the record. So yeah, that's how it is. And that's the awesome thing about the sport. It's like you're at the top and then suddenly someone new comes in and just like blows everybody away. And then everybody tries to catch up with that person, you know?
Yeah. So for those who don't know, and I recommend everyone go back to the first episode that we did with Nelson, but for those who don't know, I mean, someone who's coming cold off the street and just joined the podcast is like, how is that even possible? Right.
Oh, right.
So give us a little bit about, I mean, how does this work? And I imagine that this is the topic of your new book. And as you tell it, I guess the question that I want to ask you is, because you're now in a very challenging position, right? Because you have reached a level of mastery where you don't even remember what it's like to not remember stuff, right? Like, and so you're transitioning to becoming a teacher. And so I'm very curious to hear, like, now that you've gone through this process of writing this book and teaching, how you describe, I mean, the superhuman feats that you do and how you're now teaching them to others.
Yeah, that's a great, point to bring up. I don't think I've ever really thought of it that way. You know, like at one point, obviously, I do think about this. At one point, I did not know how to do any of the things that I claim or have shown to do with my memory. So I was in a position as maybe many of your listeners are, where they're like listening to someone else that can do it and they think, holy cow, I can't do that. I could never do that. This person must be gifted, or even if they aren't, maybe that's a tremendous amount of work that I don't have the patience for or skill set for. And I remember back when I first was learning about this stuff, you know, it was not as easy to access back then in the mid 2000s.
There was no Super Learner Masterclass, huh?
There was not, no. I think I had an audiobook by one of the world champions at the time. And even that, I think at the time was outdated, but it still was pretty good. But, you know, I remember looking at people like Ben Pridmore and Simon Reinhart and stuff, and just seeing the stuff that they could do and being like, man, I would love to be at their level, but I don't know how, you know, and I wanted to jump to that level immediately, but I knew that, you know, I had to take baby steps. And I remember, you know, kind of improving my memory quickly at first, but not being at their level and just looking up at them like they were at the stars, you know, and then, you know, over time I've gotten to their level, maybe not Simon or maybe not Ben with cards, but I think we each have our weaknesses and strengths. I think I'm up there with them. Yeah. Now I don't even think twice about it. When I memorize a deck of cards, it's like spreading butter on a piece of bread. I don't even think about it.
And how fast do you memorize a deck of cards these days?
It hasn't really changed much. It's still hovering around 30 seconds, which sounds nice, but actually it's pretty slow these days. Everybody who's new and young to the sport is pushing 20 seconds. And now there's people, I think the record was broken just a few weeks ago by a young Mongolian kid, and his score was like 12 and a half seconds.
Oh my God. I can't even shuffle through a deck of cards in 12 and a half seconds with my hands.
Yeah, try to fathom that. 12 and a half seconds. You're looking at all 52 cards and processing them and knowing them forwards and backwards, right?
unbelievable. And yet it's something that anyone can learn to do. And as you have often said, like you had no gifted memory when you came into this.
No. I mean, my memory was average, I'd say. And I really mean that. I know some people maybe roll their eyes and are like, well, maybe you had something. And I was like, honestly, no. I would look at memory and think that was the most boring, difficult thing anyone could do. Just a tedious process of repetition. And then even then, you're not guaranteed to know what you probably studied over and over again, So I struggled with that.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting to note, like, it is this transition. I always say, so we teach our Branding You masterclass, which teaches folks like yourself, right, who are experts. I mean, we had someone join the program who was a 5-time national champion senior ballroom dancer. Right?
Oh,
he and
wow.
his wife win the competition every year. And now they want to learn how to teach and how to teach online and how to impact people. And we often say, not everyone is the number one and the 4-time champion and stuff like that. And we often say that the people who are at the cutting edge don't have time to teach this stuff. Right. And so now you're seeing this, right? Like, as you said, you've been focusing the last year plus of your life on writing multiple books, not to mention Climb for Memory, your nonprofit, and, Everest Attempts and stuff like that. And so you're seeing it, right? You're making that sacrifice where you're now sacrificing your ego. And I think this is a really admirable thing to say, like, okay, I've won the championships enough. It's now time to sit down, write this book, and share this wisdom with the people.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate that you can't do everything at 100 miles an hour. If I want to share this with people and really write a good book and, make a business out of teaching people and sharing that knowledge, something has to give. So yeah, I can't spend all the hours training to be the best. And that's kind of okay. After 4 wins, it's kind of like, I love the competing and I love the sport and I love obviously being the best if I can be. But at some point, you lose a bit of the drive and it's hard to get that back. So I'm happy to transition because I think I'm at a point where it's like, I have all this information. I have the clout and the titles so that people will listen. So why not use that to kind of spread the message?
Totally. Now, tell me a bit about how you're teaching this stuff, because as you know, you've been through and looked at our 10-week program, and we're recently now exploring this idea of how quick can we get it if it's just memory and not speed reading, right? How quick can we actually teach people? And you're obviously teaching and traveling and lecturing and stuff like that. How do you go about teaching this as one of the foremost experts in the world? How long do you take for it to kind of sink into people? And what are the things that you teach? I mean, give me a broad overview, if you will.
Yeah, let's start kind of with the things that I offer, because it can vary in terms of what you mean by teaching. Sometimes people just want me to come in and do kind of like a flash 1 hour capture. Like the people watching will maybe capture one nugget of advice from my talk and that'll be useful to them. But, they're not really learning the depths of memory techniques. And that's fine. That's kind of sometimes what people want or businesses want. So there's that. Then there's, companies that want me to come in and do a series of workshops or seminars. That's kind of the same thing, but stretched out a little more so they get more in depth. And I'll kind of break down, my 1 hour flash talk into kind of a more in-depth series. So we can touch on all of the things like names and numbers and different strategies. And then I have more ongoing things where I'm either coaching privately one-on-one or I'm coaching a group. And, that depends where they're located as well. Sometimes I have to do that remotely, which means we're doing, video conferences, or I'm actually being flown there to meet with them. But the thing is like, and this is what I found with memory, is I can only say so much about how to do it. The rest of it is me coaching you, giving you kind of the feedback that you need to see if you're doing it right, what you could be changing. But all the secrets at that point almost on what should be happening in your brain. Right. And then it's a matter of the people sitting down and practicing. So it kind of transitions into me almost coaching rather than teaching after a certain point, because I got to keep people on track, got to keep people motivated to train their memory. And then I got to give them feedback based on their results and maybe give them ideas for fresh ways to train so that they don't lose interest,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the hardest challenges when I was building the Super Learner program is like, how do I do this in a way that people are actually going to be able to learn without me sitting over their shoulders? And that's it. I mean, you now know all about that, writing a book and really having to get into, I call it the psychological state of the learner. Is like, okay, well, where are people going to trip up and get stuck? How fast do you think people can learn this stuff? I mean, obviously not to the level of 12-second deck of cards, but in your experience, when you've met with people, is this something that you can actually teach people in one day?
Okay, good question. So the concept of how memory techniques work, I think you can teach that in a day. I think people can grasp that in a day pretty easily because it's something that we all have somewhere within us. I don't really think of like what I do as teaching you rather than just, well, it is teaching, but it's not like teaching you a skill. It's really just showing you how to hone something that is kind of already there. Just the proper way to use something, you know, like a refresher course for your memory rather than like showing you something brand new.
Yeah.
But what I've seen, so for example, in my book, I try to boil it down because it's a book. I have limited pages. I try to boil down what I do for all memory cases when I'm memorizing something into the smallest amount of thought. So in the book, you'll notice I talk about this kind of see, link, go 3-step process, which I say you can apply to anything you want to memorize. You got to see something as a picture in your mind. Then you got to link it or attach it to something that's already rooted in your mind. That can be a memory palace or a peg list or whatever. And then finally is to really like, that's the glue that puts it all together. You kind of put the first 2 steps together with as much visual sensory information as you can to really make it stick. And so that part is easy to understand. And what I find gets like, if you ask, could I write another book and what would I put in it different? Would I be adding more? I mean, sure, I'd say see, link, go all over the place, but what I'd have to be, I think, writing about mostly to help people if I wanted to go further was the C part. How do I encode different kinds of information? And I think that's where people usually need the most help is like, okay, cool, I get the idea, but here's a deck of cards. How do I see that? Or how do I encode that? How do I encode numbers? How do I encode my schedule? How do I encode if I'm a doctor and I'm looking at a chart of a patient? How do I memorize that? How do I encode that? So it's always the strategy of how to do that process that I think is really where I think there's longevity in how I can teach someone.
I love that. 2 comments on that. One, this is what I love about being in the industry that we're in, which is the teaching industry, because there's no such thing as competitors. And you're going to teach, I've never heard see, link, go, right? That's something you came up with to teach, you know, a lot of the same things, but that's going to resonate with a group of people that my way of teaching it doesn't resonate with, that Ron White's doesn't resonate with, right, that Mark Shannon's, you know, and it's like, there can be 500 of us, there can be 5,000 of us each teaching this in the way that we best understand it. And it's going to help people. And that's why, you know, I recommend people check out your book. We actually sent your book out, you know, to our entire mailing list. I recommend people check out Joshua Foer's book, who, by the way, recommended your book, which is really, really cool that he gave you a quote for it. And I love that our students benefit, or our readers in this case, benefit from the fact that we call it brute force learning. If you can learn something from as many different angles and as many different teachers in as many different ways as possible, it's so much better than reading it once in my book or your book and then trying to piece it together, because you're going to have the see, link, go is going to resonate in a different way and it's going to reinforce your knowledge. It's just a nice thing about our industry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm all about like sharing other people's versions of how I say things, because I like to think that I explain things well, but I know that I'm not for everybody. Some people maybe think I speak too fast, or my metaphors for things are way out there. And so maybe, you know, hearing me talk puts them to sleep. So, you know, I think it's good to get different angles. And yeah, there's definitely no harm in sharing the love between other memory teachers.
Totally. And the second thing is, you know, talking about the timelines, we're playing with this as well. And we're about to release a 5-day memory challenge course because we really want to experiment and see like how far can we push this from our Super Learner Masterclass. The first 3 weeks are all memory. We want to try and condense that down. So we're playing with it. But at the same time, it's exactly that question that you talked about is like, okay, well, I could teach you the basics of it.
Yeah.
And people often ask like, what's the difference between your masterclass and, you know, the version 2 one, which is a fraction of the price? It's like, well, how far do you want to take this, right? Do you want to learn the PAO method, you know, for memorizing huge strings of numbers fast? Do you want to learn cards? Do you want to learn how to memorize entire legal frameworks? And it's like, how much more stuff are you going to apply it to, and how deep are we going to go on this? And I mean, it's endless, right? You and I have seen some crazy stuff that people can memorize, like memorizing binary digits still blows my mind that that's part of the memory championships. Like how even someone like me, right? If I didn't know you, I wouldn't know how that stuff actually worked. You know, I know how to memorize digits backwards, forwards. We were joking around, you and I, about like the challenge is actually forgetting the digits when I memorize them, but then binary comes along and blows your mind.
Yeah. No, that's true. Actually, binary is actually not that hard if you know the strategy. That's kind of the trick, you know, like with a lot of different things you have to memorize.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to touch on your other book, though, because you wrote an awesome book. I guess wrote is the term, but it's a children's book with a lot of illustrations.
Yes.
Tell me about that, because I'm really passionate. The other thing that I want to figure out, not just how fast can this stuff be taught, but how young of people can learn this stuff. And, you know, you just had your first child. Congratulations. So you and I are both really passionate about this and exploring, can we really get this in the hands of young children?
So the book that I drew/wrote, I mean, it's hard to say wrote because it's very, very simple for super young kids. It's called I Forgot Something, but I can't remember what it was. So it's kind of just a cute little story of an elephant who forgets something and can't remember what it was that he forgot. And this owl, the wise owl, comes along and kind of teaches him a memory trick to help him not forget something. And then, spoiler, he remembers it at the end.
I was on this edge of my seat there.
Yeah, if you turn to page 20, you'll find the ending. Part of the desire to write that book was just like, I'm fascinated with how like spongy kids' minds are. And it's like everything that I teach with these memory techniques, it's a lot of stuff is what kids just do naturally with their minds. And so I always want to see like how young could you teach this kind of thing? And I tried to dumb it down as simple as possible to something that like a 3-year-old could understand. And it worked. I get a lot of my friends who have kids that read the book and they remember, there's a list in the book that they have to remember, not just the night that they read the book, but, years later, and they still know the words, which is crazy. But yeah, I think I'm more interested in that than necessarily teaching adults, because if we could get kids to learn this stuff at a young age and it was just, ingrained in us that this is how you use your memory properly, and for learning through all your grade school, you're going to apply these skills to store the information you need to know. I don't know. I just think that would save so much stress on kids growing up. Grades would be higher.
Totally.
You could just cover so much more, and there wouldn't be that stress of like cramming and tests you have to study for. It would be like, I don't even know what a world like that would look like, but I can only imagine it would be good,
Yeah, I love that. And that's an awesome quotable. I think about that too, because, my journey to getting into all of this, I often tell people, you don't start a podcast on becoming superhuman because you were happy with who you were growing up, right? And I struggled, and my struggle was academic and it was social, and I wasn't learning in both of those areas. My inability to learn resulted in depression, anxiety, all kinds of really nasty stuff for years. Mm-hmm. And it would have been so much simpler if I could have just learned more effectively, not just in the classroom, which was the start of it. Like, why are my grades worse than all my friends? And why am I the dummy in the class? But also the social skills. Like when I read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, my life got measurably better, to the extent where I realized like, holy crap, I can actually learn to be the kind of person that I want to be. It's just like, I didn't realize that there were things written in books that could actually measurably make my life better until I was 13 years old, because everything that you read in school is, let's be honest, not actually going to make your day-to-day life any better. And just that idea has carried me for years and years and years, and become this obsession of how do I learn to be the kind of person that I want to be. And I think in order to be able to do that and pick up books like that, you better be able to learn and remember more effectively. I mean, that's what drives everything that we do.
Right. Yeah. No, everything you said there is on point. I don't know how we kind of turn education on its head so that it values this kind of stuff. Like when you're young, you get assignments at school where it's like, go home and memorize this, which, some people don't think it's a good thing to just memorize stuff. But at some point, listen, if you're going to learn, you have to memorize something. But, if you're given a list of things to memorize, whether it's historical or a poem that you got to recite, they're just like, here, do it. And there's no primer in how to properly do that with techniques. And that should be the first thing you learn in school is,
I agree.
Like a home ed thing, but for your class, but for your memory.
I totally agree. This is what I ranted about in my TED Talk. And I hope that all kinds of educators and policymakers would reach out to me, and not one ever did. But I talked to Harry Lorraine about this when we had him on the podcast, the great memory expert. And he, in the 1950s and 60s, was famous enough that he could go into schools, and he just got met with so much resistance. He'd be like, well, okay, you're going to learn how to memorize. And they'd be like, well, we don't teach memory. We want the kids to learn. And he said exactly what you said, but he never managed to crack that nut of how do we get education. I mean, we're having this problem in everything, right? Like schools can't, because of so many levels in bureaucracy, they can't even get their act together enough to teach technology and typing and programming, things that they are interested in teaching. So imagine the stuff that they're fighting. But we had an idea about this about half a year ago where we realized if we can just make big enough waves in the research community, it will have a ripple effect by influencing policymakers, educators. And so we're going to go at it from another, and I've never talked about this, but we're going at it from another angle, which is we want to hire researchers to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt how this stuff works, that this stuff works for everybody and anybody, including children. So we want to start funding our own research, working with like the Weizmann Institute here in Israel. And if anyone out there is interested in doing research, that's what we're passionate about, because we just want to make waves. I don't want to fight battles until these people are ready to make changes at a policy level, at a pedagogical design level, in classrooms, in curriculums. But if we make big enough waves, people are going to start scratching their heads and be like, why isn't this in our schools? Yeah. So that's kind of the way we're going about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's kind of how I'm going about it here too, but it's tough to get attention, but bit by bit, I do notice that there is more of kind of a wave of interest in this memory stuff, at least in the States. Like this maybe isn't the way I would want it to happen, but this could be a way to lead to getting it into schools, is that there's a lot more interest on, say, television shows on mind stuff. We have more shows that are like game showy, but having to showcase mental abilities rather than like physical or trivia or something, which is great. They have these shows about kids being geniuses, and I'm like, okay, I don't really necessarily love them exploiting kids like that, but it is showing that, being mentally sharp and smart is actually kind of hip these days. And that's what it takes,
Totally. And I don't know if this is public knowledge. If not, we cut it out of the episode, but you're already working on your next book, which deals with exactly this issue. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, the illustrated book that I did, the children's book, was a personal thing I wanted to do. And it was, I think, successful just as a test almost to see how young I could get the information. But I think getting older, like when kids are actually learning stuff and having to use their memory often in school setting, is probably a place where I should be teaching kids these techniques. After this book that's just been published, now with the same publisher, I'm working on the second book, which would be essentially the same thing, but targeted towards kind of 10 to 13-year-old age range. So just people who are in their mid grades trying to, where they actually have to learn a lot of stuff, like their times tables, historic dates, facts and elements and all that stuff. So it'll be very school kind of oriented. And I don't know really if anything out there exists like that. So I'm excited to do that.
Brilliant. And I mean, I caught you say it in passing, but you've actually had success with kids as young as 3. So we can expect to see really incredible results for young people, ages 5, 6, 7, 8, and beyond.
Yeah, I think so. And I always think if I had learned this stuff at a young age, I'd be doing it automatically if I was given something to memorize. I'd have these strategies kind of, cataloged in my mind, ready for use for whatever comes my way,
Yeah. And how much time could you have saved and how much would it change your life?
Yeah, exactly. Would it make me perfect or anything like that? Probably not. I'd probably still have anxiety about something else or whatever. But, at least with learning and stuff, I'd be a lot more confident about what I know and what I'm capable of knowing.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it. And I'm so glad that you have dedicated, this next chapter in your life to sharing and teaching these incredible skills that you've developed. I'm really excited about it. And I do want to ask you though, you mentioned, I didn't win and there were a bunch of reasons for that. We talked a little bit about that with the fact that you are focusing so much of your time on reading and speaking. But I have to ask because, memory expert, I can't forget. What happened and what changed this year? And are the methods developing in a way that you're not following or what's up?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I trained hard enough and my scores were just as good, if not better than years past. Like I said, the cards are kind of the same. Numbers, my scores were better than they'd ever been. The names, I set a record. So in some senses, I've grown, I've improved since my last win. So that felt good. I wonder, it all comes back to that same thing I said earlier, is it just like over years, it's hard to kind of have that hunger, sadly. I wish I had the same hunger. And as much as I try to redefine what my goal is and what it means to me, it's never the same as when you first are like out of the gates,
Totally.
That's frustrating to realize, but that's just the way it is,
I was just like 2 hours ago talking to Brandon, a member of my team, and just saying we were recording in the studio and he's like, no, man, I'm going to keep going. I'm like, you should rest. He's like, no, I got this. I was like, God, you have the energy and zeal of a younger man. And we opened up this whole conversation about it. Just like when you're young and you're hungry. I mean, I said like when you're young, you have more energy and less compassion for yourself. You're just hard on yourself. You're like, I got to do this and I'm going to power through it. And then he made a really interesting point, which is like, let's be honest here, Jonathan, like you've accomplished a lot in the last 10 years since you were my age. You have the luxury of sitting back. And I was like, I never thought about that, but that's exactly true. Like I don't have to prove things to myself or to others in the same way that you don't. Like after the fourth time of winning, the national championship, it's impossible to have that hunger. And I think the hedonic ladder is a real thing, right? Like the fourth win is not going to make you as happy as the first win, but the first book that you publish that gets into tens of thousands of people, it's chasing the next high in the best possible way, by the way, because otherwise, you would just run yourself into the ground competing 50 years in a row.
Yeah. But, like every year I choose to compete, I have in my head a goal, right? I have to say something to myself to get me to get up in the morning and do this before a competition every day. And so, every year it kind of changes, right? The first time it was like, I want to win. I want to be the best. And the second time was like, I want back to back. And then after that, it was like, well, at the time I was going to have my book come out. It didn't come out. That was 2014. I was like, I need to win this because of the book. And then I did. And then 2015 was like, well, I think this is my last year. I want to win it. And 4 times would be great. So that was my goal. And then now this year, it's just kind of my message to myself was 5 would be great, but I want to just show people that I'm still in the game. It's all different, like there's different fire behind each one. And so I'm not blaming that thought necessarily immediately on how I lost. I lost because one of the events I memorized, I went for too many words, more than I needed to. And I just was caught off guard and people went way more safer than I thought around me. I didn't have to go for that many. And that was just a bad judgment call on my part.
Right, because you have that risk, right? When you bite off more than you can chew, it's the same thing with any memory thing. It's like you're running the risk of the stuff in the middle fading away.
Yeah, right. So if people aren't familiar, the first round of the finals at the US Championship is called random words. And you basically go backstage and you memorize from a list of 300 words. You get 15 minutes and then you come back on stage, all the competitors. And you, one by one, you're sitting in chairs, you recite the list in order. And when it's your turn, you got to say that word. And this year they gave us more words, 300. It used to be 200. And they gave us 2 strikes. So you could afford to get 1 wrong, but once you got 2 wrong, you were out. And so me in my head, I was like, okay, well, if people are going to get 2 strikes, I feel like they're going to go for way more. In the past, my strategy had always been just memorize about 100, 120. Nobody usually gets that high. And the round ends after 2 or 3 people are eliminated. So you have to think like, you just have to be a bit better than, just the 3 worst.
You just got to be faster than the next guy.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, so this year, you have a little more leeway, but more words. So I was like, I think people are going to go for more. I was so wrong. I mean, the round didn't get past like 60 or 70 words, which is the same as it does for less words. And I went for 240 words or something insane. And before I knew it, usually with that size of words, I need a little bit of time between memorizing and recall to kind of consolidate in my mind. Mm-hmm. And we were brought on stage immediately. We had to say the words immediately. And I was just like, oh shit. And I think I said the first word right. And then I had to pass the second one. There was my strike. And then the next one, I think I said a word, but it was flipped with the one before it. And then I was done. I was so embarrassed. I was so I couldn't believe what I had done. And then afterwards, I was just thinking what was I thinking? No one is going to go for 240 words. No one.
Well, at least that was a strategy loss, at least your memory's not going.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, but you know what peeves me is I've always been known at these competitions for being ice cold and steadfast and unwavering. Right. In my composure and stuff, because at the U.S. Championship, you need that kind of composure because it's all this sudden elimination style events for memory. And so I'm annoyed that I lost that composure this time. That's very unlike me.
Totally. Tell me about mountain climbing. You're on a break, I understand, since you started a family.
Yeah, I'm staying home a little bit more right now. But yeah, I think between last time we talked, I gave Everest another go in 2016 and didn't get there either. That was my 3rd try, and I got very sick at the high camp and had to forfeit my attempt. I was on Kilimanjaro earlier this year. I ran a trip through my charity, guiding them up to the top, and that was awesome. I really enjoy just taking people along for the ride, whether it's mountain climbing or memorizing. So that's kind of, I do see another Everest attempt in the future, but I like bringing people to places and pushing them to places where they typically don't think they can go.
So cool, man. And I think it's amazing how you don't get down about it. Real winners don't get down when they miss an attempt or, don't win a competition. And I think it really speaks to the mindset of a champion. It's you're not defining yourself through those 2 failures.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. The day or week after, I was miserable. I was really upset with myself on both things. But, you got to turn that into the fuel for the next push, whatever that you turn that into.
I love that. Any tips on that?
I don't know. Because what happens to me is I put so much of myself into preparing for these things, and so when you're done with a competition or an Everest climb like that, an expedition, whether you make it or you fail, there's always a hole inside me that I feel. And I think it's just you suddenly don't have the goal anymore because it's past, right? So you just kind of have to figure out what you're going to do next. I feel the times that I've lost or failed have filled that hole bigger, afterwards than in times when I've succeeded. Because when you succeed, it's you got to fill the hole, but it's the cork is too small, the hole is too big, and it's you don't have a cork big enough to fill it because you're satisfied in some way. So,
right.
Whereas here, it's I have so much shit I need to plug in that hole right now to push me forward. So that's the positive, I guess, is failing is great. I think I have a video on my YouTube after I lost where I talk about that because nothing's really come good out of winning for me, in my future, other than getting more business or something like that. But in terms of personal development, the most has come from losing, honestly.
Wow. It wasn't easy to ask that question, but I'm really, really glad I did because that's a brilliant takeaway for us to start wrapping on. I know you're in the middle of a book launch, so I want to be respectful of your time. Nelson, any superhuman stuff you're doing, any new kind of superhuman hacks that you're doing to maintain on peak performance during this book launch as a new father?
Oh man, maybe. I mean, I've gotten really obsessed with like diets and just like tracking my like vitals and stuff like on everything I do. So I have heart rate monitor attached to me all the time. And I'm on a break now, but I was doing keto for a number of months, Keto Diet, and experimenting with like drinks that have ketones in it and stuff. And I don't know how much you know about it, but I feel like you probably know a bit about it. You look like the kind of guy that
We've talked a bit about it. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying to look into other ways to kind of fine tune my mind and my physical fitness as well. So yeah, just playing around with some weird stuff.
I love it. Well, Nelson, I'm really, really grateful for your time. It's always a pleasure to chat, and let's make sure to keep in touch. The book is called Remember It.
Yep.
I got that right. The charity people should check out is Climb for Memory. We'll put all those links in the show notes at superhuman.blog, and we'll also make sure you guys can get connected to Nelson if you want to go on one of those mountain climbs.
Yeah. And one last thing. I mean, we talked about it for a second in terms of how I teach. One of the things I've been focusing on, because I don't have a course like you do. Your course is amazing, but I've been focusing on the last year and a half. Yeah. Personal plug from Nelson, supporting your courses. But no, my YouTube channel, I just love making kind of like these really hacky vlog videos on how to do little memory tricks here and there. So they're not super in depth, but they're kind of fun. And if some of your listeners have a moment, they should check out some of those videos on YouTube.
Absolutely. And we had some time on the calendar for you and I to record some stuff together for YouTube. But then your child went and was born that exact same day. So we'll have to, maybe after we hit wrap on this record, we'll get some time on the calendar and record some stuff so we can get it out to the people.
Would love that. Yeah. Would love to share some more stuff with your listeners.
All right, my friend. So let's talk soon. I really appreciate you coming in today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperhuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.